Rumpole, the tax letters.
Pillar, I'm working.
And the coffee's boiling.
Let it.
Thank you very much. I can't actually take you back in my memories 1,000 years, not quite. But I can go back to the beginning of the century or earlier in the century, the years before the war was about to break out. Dark days over Europe, dark days over me. I was a schoolboy at Harrow, and Winston Churchill came down to our school to join in the school's songs. And I took one look at him, and he seemed to be about 99 years of age and totally drunk. I said to my friend, I said, oh my God, I said, if they ever put him in charge of the war, we've had it. Well, they put him in charge of the war, and I managed to survive. And it's a huge pleasure to be here and to read some of the things that have meant most to me. Well, as those of you who read anything about me or read what I've written will know, I was born into the law. My father was, I think, the most successful, the most famous divorce barrister of his day. So that in my childhood I was housed, educated, warmed, clothed, fed, entirely on the proceeds of adultery, cruelty and willful neglect to provide reasonable maintenance. And we were so deeply into the divorce court in my childhood that in the nursery, instead of the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, I used to get the Duchess and the Seven Co-Respondents. And my father came home to me in the nursery and he sat on the end of my bed and said, terrific day in court today, John, terrific success. Managed to prove adultery by evidence of inclination and opportunity. He said, you know, really the only evidence I had was a pair of footprints upside down on the dashboard of an Austin 7 motor car, parked in Hampstead Garden suburb. So, quite early in my life, it was decided that I should become a lawyer.
It is sure that honesty, learning, reliability and common sense might all be united in the person of a lawyer. It is also sure that they never were.
That's John Wilkes on lawyers, may be true. I'd rather like to remember some of the wonderful judges we used to meet at the Old Bailey. There was one called Judge Maud. He was very civilized, very handsome. He had a beautiful profile, wonderful little grey sideboards. He had impeccable white linen, had little very highly polished gold half glasses. He always rose the court at 11:30 every morning for a glass of chilled Chablis and a little nibble of Stilton cheese. And he had to sentence a totally drunk Irish labourer who'd rightly been convicted of peeing down the stairs down Leicester Square tube station, indecent exposure, foul and abusive language, assaulting the police, irritation of passers-by. He took one look at him over his little half glasses and he said, I'm going to take a most merciful course with you, my man.
God bless you, sir. God bless your Royal Highness.
I'm going to place you upon probation.
God bless your Holiness. May your shadow never grow shorter.
But on one condition.
Anything. I'll do anything for your nobleness.
The condition is that you never touch another drop of alcohol for the rest of your natural life.
Not a drop. I swear it, your lordship.
But by nothing, I mean absolutely nothing. Not even the teeniest, weeniest little dry sherry before your dinner. It was also Judge Maud who had the terrible task of sentencing two men who'd been found in an attitude of unusual friendliness under Waterloo Bridge. And he looked at them over his little half glasses and he said, you two men have been found guilty of a terrible act, an abominable act, an act which has been cursed down the centuries. It makes strong women vomit and men faint, he said. And what makes it so much worse, he said, you chose to do it under one of the most beautiful bridges in London. There's a gloss to that story which I don't believe to be true, which is this, that he added, you two men should go away and pull yourselves together. But of course, since those days, the permissive society came, and friendly gentlemen are now perfectly, yes, it should be perfectly legal and okay. And I would like to remember again, just before we get on to the literature, the noble lord who passed through the House of Lords the Sexual Offences Bill, which made consenting friendly gentlemen perfectly legal. And he was called Lord Aram. He had a devoted wife who always embroidered on his shirt over his heart his coronet, and his initials. And for that reason, Lord Arran was known to his many friends as the Greater Crested Tit. Now, Lord Arran passed through the House of Lords two noble statutes. One was the Sexual Offences Act, which dealt with friendly gentlemen, and another one was for the preservation of wildlife, and in particular for the preservation of badgers. And when he lay dying, the story goes, there was a friend at Lord Arran's bedside, and Lord Arran said, "Can you just explain this to me? It's worried me all my life," he said. "When we passed our buggers bill through the House of Lords, the place was absolutely packed. They were falling out of the public galleries, they were swinging from the chandeliers, they were crowded on the steps to the throne. You couldn't get a postcard to the House of Lords when we passed our buggers bill. But on the other hand, and by contrast, he said, when we passed our badgers bill, the place was absolutely empty. 3 old earls with tweed hats in them, that's all there were. How can you explain it?" His friend looked at him for a long time and said, "Lord Arran," he said, "have you never considered there are very few badgers in the House of Lords?" Well, sometime in the middle of my legal career, I decided I wanted a character to keep me alive in my old age. I thought of all the barristers I saw around the Old Bailey, who always called the judge old darling and never called their wives old darling. And I thought of Rumpole. He hasn't been an altogether unmixed blessing. I remember defending an East End totter. I'm sure you know what he is, like step-down son. He goes round with his Tony and his trap and sells out any old iron to markets. And this totter was accused, I'm sure rightly, of attempting to murder his next-door neighbour with the penknife which he used to cut up the carrots for the pony. And I made the most brilliant speech in defence of this totter that I could. And after doing that, you have to sit with your client in the cells, I'm sure some of you may have done it, under the Old Bailey, waiting for the jury to come back with a verdict. And it's a moderately embarrassing period of time, you know. Conversation tends to flow like cement. You really don't know what to say. I mean, you could possibly say, well, you could say, "See you again in about 14 years." You could say, "Win a few, lose a few," I suppose. But I didn't say either of that, and a silence fell between the totter and me, and he looked at me, he said, "You know, you're Mr. Rumpole could have won this case." He said, "I don't know why you couldn't." But I thought we'd have a bit of Rumpole, but this isn't Rumpole in court or anything to do with the law. This is Rumpole in a smart restaurant. Now, my wife Hilda is a good plain cook. She's not in any way a woman who lacks imagination. Indeed, some of the things she imagines Rumpole gets up to when out of her sight are colourful in the extreme. But she doesn't apply such gifts to a chop or a potato, being content to grill the one and boil the other. She can also boil cabbage into submission and fry fish. The nearest her cooking comes to the poetic is perhaps in her baked jam roll, which I've always found to be an emotion best recollected in tranquility. From all this you will gather that Hilda's cooking is honest but not exotic, and that happily the terrible curse of nouvelle cuisine has not infected Froxbury Mansions and the Gloucester Road. So it's not often that I'm confronted with the sort of fare photographed in the Sunday supplements. I scarcely ever sit down to an octagonal plate on which a sliver of monkfish is arranged in a composition of pastel shades, which also features a brushstroke of pink sauce, a single peeled prawn, and a sprig of dill. Such gluttony is happily beyond my means. It wasn't, however, beyond the means of Hilda's cousin Everard, who was visiting us from Canada. He told us that he felt we stood in dire need of what he called a taste of gracious living, and booked a table for 3 at La Maison Jean-Pierre. An extremely superior brand of French head waiter manifested himself beside our table, announced his presence with a discreet cough, and led off with,
Madame, Monsieur, tonight Jean-Pierre recommends for the main course the poésie de la poitrine du canard au céleri et épinards crus.
Poetry. That poetry, Rumpole. Tell us about it, George. Whet our appetite.
A wafer-thin slice of breast of duck, marinated in a drop or two of armagnac, delicately grilled and served with a celery remoulade and some leaves of spinach lightly steamed.
I will have the posy. It sounds delicious.
I would like a poesy of steak and kidney pudding, not pie. Mixed scoop of boiled cabbage, English mustard if you have it, and mashed potatoes.
Rumpole, behave yourself.
This pudding is not on our menu.
Your pleasure is our delight. It says that on your menu. Couldn't you ask Cookie if she could delight me along those lines?
Cookie? I do not know who Monsieur means by cookie. Our maître de cuisine is Jean-Pierre O'Higgins himself. He's in the kitchen now.
How very convenient. Have a word in his shell-like, why don't you? There are many too many laws, aren't there? I mean, you can't really live through a decent day without breaking a law or two. And I blame it all on the common market, really. I mean, we found to our horror that there was a common market law against cutting down a yew hedge. And we've got a friend who was a farmer, and he cut down his yew hedge, and he got 6 months in prison. And there he was in this cell, and there was another man in the cell. And the other man said, "What are you in here for?" And our friend the farmer said, "Well, I've just got 6 months for cutting down a yew hedge. What are you in here for?" The other man said, "Well, I've just got 12 years for rape." And our friend said, "Well, you must have had absolutely acres of it." About halfway through my legal career, I became something called a QC, queer customers is what they call them. It's rather a peculiar process becoming a QC. You have to go down to the House of Lords and swear an oath to help the Queen whenever she's in trouble. Well, she's been in plenty of trouble, but she hasn't actually sent for me yet. But in order to swear this oath, you have to wear the most peculiar uniform. You wear black patent leather shoes with little diamond buckles, and black silk stockings, and breeches with diamond buckles, and a tailcoat and a waistcoat, and lots of lace at your wrists and lace at your throat, and a long silk gown, a long wig with sort of spaniel's ears so you can't hear what's going on. And I was standing in the road in Fleet Street waiting for the car to come and take me down to the House of Lords in all this gear to swear my oath. And an old judge came hobbling by and he said, "Mortimer," he said, "how are you keeping your silk stockings up?" So I said, "Well, more or less by faith, hope and prayer." And he said, "I'll give you a tip, and this will be of enormous value in your future legal career." So I said, "Well, thank you very much. What is it?" He said, "Well, there's a wonderful shop in Baker Street which sells suspender belts to the outsized hospital matron." You know, I thought that was enormously valuable. And I think it must come as a great relief to the criminals of England to know that when you're being sent down for 10 years, the judge is undoubtedly wearing a suspender belt built for an outsized hospital matron. But when I was a QC, I began to do more important cases. I began to talk to juries, and I got great respect for juries. I think they take their duties very seriously. They listen as hard as they can. They come to verdicts. I didn't agree with some of them, but they were all fairly rational. And of course, sometimes they go to sleep, but you know, everybody in court goes to sleep from time to time. And I remember one case, it was some sort of indecent act or indecent suggestion or indecent behaviour by the man in the dock to the lady who was giving evidence. And the prosecutor was taking her through her evidence, and he said, "Would you mind telling my lord and the jury, what did this man in the dock say to you?" He said, "No, I couldn't possibly say that. Too disgusting, too obscene. I could not possibly bring myself to use those ghastly words in public." And the judge said, "Well, I quite understand, very understanding judge. Let her be given a pencil and a piece of paper and let her write it down." So the usher brought her a pencil and a bit of paper, and what she wrote down was, "Would you care for a screw?" And the judge said, "Well, now let that be folded up and handed to the jury to read." So it was taken across the court. Number 1 jury person read it, handed on to number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7 got it. Number 12 jury person was an elderly gentleman who was fast asleep. And seated next to him was a fairly personable young lady. she got this note and opened it and read it and looked and saw this sleeping man beside her. So she gave him a great big nudge. He woke up with a start and she handed him the note. And he read it with obvious and apparent satisfaction and folded it up very neatly and put it away in his wallet. And the judge said, now let that be handed up to me. He said, purely private matter. Well, I began to defend murder. Well, I didn't actually, of course, defend anyone who'd done a murder, but I defended people it was suggested they might have done murders. And I found to my surprise that murderers are really rather agreeable clients. I mean, people in divorce cases are horrible clients. You know, they ring you up at 2 o'clock in the morning to say, you know, you'll never guess what he's done now. He's just gone off with a toast back. You know, that's it. Or he's asking for custody of the bloody dog. But murderers, on the whole, find it harder to get to the telephone. And I really found that, on the whole, they'd killed the one person in the world that was really bugging them, and a sort of peace had descended over them. You know, I know murder gets a very bad press, but I mean, murder seems to me sort of the one crime which is really understandable, which ordinary people can commit. I mean, I'm sure no one here could rob a bank, but there just might be someone we could, you know, sort of do without. And I'm not going to persuade you of that in my advocacy. I'm just going to call a piece of evidence on the proposition that decent, law-abiding citizens can kind of slide into murder. And if you haven't been in Scotland, in Edinburgh, on the 18th of August 1978, you probably wouldn't have read this little item in the Edinburgh Evening News of this date, which I think rather bears out my theory. While they were waiting at a bus stop in Clareston, Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Thirsty were threatened by Mr. Robert Clear. He demanded I give him my wife's purse, said Mr. Thirsty. Telling that the purse in question was in her basket, I bent down, put my hands up her skirts, detached her artificial leg, and struck him over the head with it. It was not my intention to do more than frighten him off. But unhappily for us all, he passed over. Well, you know, I mean, that could happen to any of us. I mean, it could particularly happen to any of us who happen to have a wife with an artificial leg. And the other thing about murders is that quite a lot of them weren't very good at it. I mean, I suppose if they'd been better at it, I wouldn't have met them. But of course, murder is a very serious business. Defending murder is very serious. You've got to be very careful not to ask too many questions. You probably shouldn't ask your client any questions at all. And you shouldn't drink too much at lunchtime. And I had a friend who was defending in a murder case, and he drank much too much one lunchtime, but he was meant to go back and make his final speech on behalf of the accused. And he made what I'm sure is one of the pithiest, the most sensible defence speeches ever made at the Old Bailey. Because he rose rather unsteadily to his feet and he said, "Members of the jury, this is the moment when I'm meant to make a reasoned and impassioned address on behalf of the man in the dock. And that will be followed by a fair and unbiased summing up by the learned judge. But," he said, "the truth of the matter is, I'm far too drunk to make a reasoned and impassioned speech. And the judge has never been known to do a fair and unbiased summing up. And you look far too stupid to come to a judgment. So I shall sit down." But being accused of any crime must be terrible, and for no one more terrible than for Oscar Wilde when he was arrested in the Cadogan Hotel. And this is how John Betjeman described it.
He sipped at a weak hock and seltzer as he gazed at the London skies, through the Nottingham lace of the curtains, or was it his bees-winged eyes? To the right and before him Pont Street did tower in her new-built red, as hard as the morning gaslight that shone on his unmade bed.
I want some more hock in my seltzer. And Robbie, please give me your hand. Is this the end or the beginning? How can I understand? So you brought me the latest yellow book, and Buchan has got in it now. Approval of what is approved of is false as a well-kept vow. More hock, Robbie. Where is the seltzer, dear boy? Pull again at the bell. They're all little better than cretins, though this is the Cadogan Hotel. One Astrakhan coat is at Willie's, another one's at the Savoy. Do patch my Morocco portmanteau and bring it on later, dear boy.
A thump and a murmur of voices.
Oh, why must they make such a din?
As the door of the bedroom swung open and two plainclothes policemen came in.
Mr. Wilde, we have come for to take you where felons and criminals dwell. We must ask you to leave with us quietly, for this is the Cadogan Hotel.
He rose and he put down the yellow book. He staggered and terrible-eyed. He brushed past the palms on the staircase and was helped to a hansom outside.
About halfway through his legal career, my father went blind. It didn't make much difference to his appearance in court. He used to fix the witnesses with his clear blue eyes. He could remember all the dates and all the letters and all the places and the bundles of correspondence. But my sainted mother had to read aloud to my father all this terrible evidence and all these awful divorce cases we did. And you can picture them. They used to travel up from Henley-on-Thames, the house where I now lived, to Paddington Station on the divorce court. You can picture them, if you will, in the first-class compartment of what was then the Great Western Railway and probably is now again. And there's my mother, because my father, like all self-respecting barristers, didn't read his briefs till about 20 minutes before he was due to appear in court. There's my mother reading aloud to my father all this ghastly evidence, private inquiry, private detective reports of male and female clothing scattered around bedrooms in the Ritz Hotel and stains on the bed sheets. And by that time my father had grown deaf as well as blind. You say, "Speak up, Kath." She'd say, "Stains on the bed sheets, sir." And the train would grind to a halt somewhere around Slough, and the entire first-class carriage would fall absolutely silent, listening to the ever-diminishing and even more embarrassed tones of my mother, in the faint hope of catching the name of some close friend or relative. But my father's blindness, terrible for him, had its great advantage to me. I had to read aloud to him. I had to read a lot of poetry, which I might not otherwise have done. And really I began to write in order to have something to read to my father. Two things I didn't have to read, the Sherlock Holmes stories and the plays of Shakespeare, because he knew all of those by heart. And from a very early age, I heard my father quoting Shakespeare at very inapposite moments. I mean, when I was 4 and he could see me, every time he caught sight of me, he used to say, "Is execution done on Caudle?" Well, when you're 4, that's a pretty tough question to have to answer. And as some people whistle tunes, would get marvellous bits of music in their head, he just got marvellous words in his head. And the cook would be bringing in his breakfast, and he used to say, "Nymph in thy orisons be all my sins remembered." And the cook said, "Well, here's your bacon." And we used to take quotations from Shakespeare out of context and, use them for quite other purposes, my father did. There's not a very well-known play, not very often seen, King John. And there's a scene in King John where Hubert the jailer has to put out little Arthur's eyes, and the executioners are waiting behind the curtain. And Hubert the jailer has a line which says, "When I strike my foot upon the ground, rush forth and bind the boy." And my father said, "Rush forth and bind the boy." Sounds rather like a rather dubious firm of solicitors. And from then on, every time he saw a solicitor he didn't know, he'd say, "Are you from Rushforth and Byron?" And we used to go, and this was a huge advantage for me, every year to see all the plays at Stratford in the repertory. It was then called the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre. We weren't the most popular members of the audience. My father liked to sort of 7-course dinner, and we used to arrive in the front row of the stalls about 25 minutes after the play had started. But once my father had had the set explained to him, he was of enormous assistance to the acting. Because he could say all the lines about 5 seconds before they could get it. Thank you very much. There's a lot of talk nowadays about sex education in schools. We didn't get very much sex education when I was at school. I was in a little preparatory school in Oxford, which was going to prepare me to go on to a public school, which was in fact a private school. And the only thing we got, like any sort of education about sex, was a talk by the headmaster when we were leaving the preparatory school. And I put it in a play called Voyage Round My Father. I think I can remember it pretty well word for word. But you can picture the scene. That's the headmaster's study. We little 12, 13-year-old boys with our socks concertinaed around our ankles and grazed knees and inky fingers are sitting on the floor. And the headmaster puts away his pipe and starts to expound to us the great futures of life and love. He starts. You are the leaders. In a month or two you'll go on to great public schools, away from this warm, cosy little establishment. Come in, you're disturbing everybody. Shut the door, boy, and there's a terrible draught. Now, what was I going to tell you? I was warning you about dreams. You all have them. You all certainly have them. And in the morning you may feel like saying to yourselves, you rotter. To have a dream like that. Well, you can't help it. That's all he said. You can't help them, not dream. If you're awake, of course, you can do something about it. You can change into a pair of shorts and go for a run across country. Or you can get into a bath and turn on the cold tap. Quite easily do that. Your housemaster will understand. He'll understand if you've been up to a French lesson or Latin or some such thing. Simply say, sir, I had to have a bath or a run or whatever it is. Just say to Mr. Raffles or Humphrey Stigler or Percy Parr, just say Mr. Parr or Mr. Raffles, depending on what school you're at, of course. This is what I felt the need to do. He'll understand perfectly. Now think simply this. When sleeping, always lie on the right side. Not on the face, obvious reasons. Not on the back, brings on dreams. Not on the left side, stops the heart. Just the right side all the time. Now, to the most serious problem you're likely to run up against. Friends. You may find that some boy from another class or a house even comes up to you and says, let's be friends. Or even offers you a slice of cake. That's a very simple one to deal with. Perfectly simple. Just say very loudly, I'm going straight to tell the housemaster. Straight away, no hesitation. Remember, the only real drawback to our great public school system is unsolicited cake. As a writer, I've always admired Lord Byron. We worked together at Harrow, not at precisely the same moment of history, but his Turkish slippers were in the library and his dagger was there, and his little daughter was buried outside Harrow churchyard because she was too illegitimate to be buried inside. And I used to lie on the tomb where he lay to write poetry. It now commands a wonderful view of Ruislip and the gasworks. But his lordship's mixture of common sense and romanticism, of conservatism and revolutionary fervour, of puritanism and sensuality, are all exactly to my taste. And here he is observing an execution with true lucid indifference and writing about it to his publisher, John Murray. The day before I left Rome, I saw 3 robbers guillotined. 2 of these men behaved calmly enough, but the first of the 3 died with great terror and reluctance, which was very horrible. The head was cut off before the eye could place the blow, but from an attempt to draw back the head, notwithstanding it was held forward by the hair, the first head was cut off too close to the ears. The other 2 were taken off more keenly. It's better than the Oriental way, and I should think of the axe of our ancestors. The pain seems little, and yet the effect to the spectator, and the preparation to the criminal, are very striking and chilly. The first turned me quite hot and thirsty, and made me shake so that I could hardly hold the opera glass. I was close but determined to see as one should see everything, once with attention. The second and third, which shows how dreadfully soon things grow indifferent, I'm ashamed to say, had no effect on me as a horror, though I would have saved them if I could. It's some time since I heard from you, the 12th of April, I believe. Yours ever truly, B. My hand shook so that I could hardly hold the opera glass. The perpetual attitude of the writer in the face of experience.
Mister, yous needn't be so spry concerning questions arty. Each has his tastes, but as for I likes a certain party. Give me the he-man's solid bliss, for yous ideas I'll match yours. A pretty girl who naked is worth 1,000,000 statues.
There was E. Cummings to bring us back from the hard reality of writing to the wonderful practices of life and love. One of the great advantages of old age is to be able to look back down the long corridors and arches of the year and remember so many beautiful, wonderful girls and wonder why it is that so many of them have married the most terrible husbands. Robert Graves wrote a poem about it.
Why have such scores of lovely, gifted girls married impossible men? Simple self-sacrifice may be ruled out, and missionary endeavour 9 times out of 10. Repeat, impossible men, not merely rustic, foul-tempered or depraved, dramatic foils chosen to show the world how well women behave and always have behaved. Impossible men, idle, illiterate, self-pitying, dirty, sly, for whose appearance, even in city parks, excuses must be made to casual passers-by. Has God's supply of tolerable husbands fallen, in fact, so low? Or do I always overvalue woman at the expense of man? Do I? It might be so.
Love spans the centuries, the millennia, and it can even bridge the generation gap, as lucky old Lord Rochester's young lady said.
Ancient person, for whom I all the flatterings youth defy, long be it ere thou grow old, aching, shaking, crazy, cold, but still continue as thou art, ancient person of my heart. On thy withered lips and dry, which like barren furrows lie, brooding kisses I will pour, shall thy youthful heat restore. Such kind showers in autumn fall, and a second spring recall, nor from thee will ever part, ancient person of my heart. Thy nobler parts, which but to name, in our sex would be counted shame, by ages frozen grasp possessed, from their ice shall be released, and soothed by my reviving hand, in former warmth and vigour stand. All a lover's wish can reach, for thy joy my love shall teach, and for thy pleasure shall improve all that art can add to love, yet still I love thee without art, ancient person of my heart.
I sometimes feel a bit guilty that I haven't been very nice to judges in Rumpole stories. And what I'd like to do is to tell a story which is told by a judge. It's rather charming that he tells it, because it's not entirely favourable to himself. And this is a judge, I'll call him Reg Dean, because that's not his name. And I should tell you that he has a wife called Doreen, who is one of those strong, silent women with a one-piece bosom, who spends a great deal of her day ironing. And this is the story that Reg tells of when he was a barrister somewhere up in the north of England. And he had a case, he had to defend Bessie, the local brothel keeper. And he did very well, and he got Bessie, the local brothel keeper, off. And she said, "I'm very, very grateful to you, Reg." She kissed him on the steps of the court. Flashes went, the press photographers took the picture. And she said, "Furthermore, I'd like to do something for you, Reg, as a reward for having got me off." He said, what would you like to do for me, to Bessie, the local brothel keeper? He said, "Well, Reg, what I'd like to tell you," he said, "any time you feel like it, come down to my house and have one free on the house." So Reg goes back home, and there's Doreen with her one-piece bosom poised over the ironing board, ironing away, and he's frightfully thrilled with himself. And he says, "I had a wonderful day in court, Doreen, defended Bessie, the local brothel keeper." Doreen irons, no reaction. He said, "I got her off you. May see a picture of us in the Yorkshire Posting. Kissed me on the steps of the court." Doreen continues ironing, no reaction. He said, "Furthermore, she was so grateful that she said to me, any time I felt like it, I could come down to her house and have one free on the house." So Doreen finishes her bit of ironing, stands up her arm. She says, "Reg," she said, "you know what I think you should do? You finish up your tea and you go down to Bessie's house and disappoint some other woman." Well, I told my father that I wanted to be a writer, and he said, "Well, of course you might be a writer, you might be a moderately successful writer. Male writers are always at home, wearing a dressing gown, brewing tea, stuck for words. He said, go out and get a job that gets you out of the house occasionally. Go out and divorce a few people. Not very difficult. But you can picture me, if you will, at that time, my 20s. I was a young, slim, slender, handsome, ambitious, upwardly mobile divorced barrister. And I used to leave home in the morning. I had a terrible row with my wife. I was bleeding at the nostril, my shirt was ripped, my tie was torn. I staggered down the stairs. All the children were suffering from infectious diseases. The au-pair girl was pregnant and had left home. I yanked open the front door, a great pile of bills, the mortgage had been foreclosed, the bank overdraft had been cancelled. I staggered into the street, the car had been stolen. I summoned a lift to my chambers in the Temple. I sank behind my desk. And I was perfectly capable of advising 60-year-old company directors on exactly how they should conduct their married lives. But I learned some wonderful literary lessons in the divorce school. I learned, for instance, the vital importance of the sporting metaphor in English dialogue. Now, I had a client then who was an admiral. He didn't have a very happy married life. He'd fallen desperately in love with the skating instructress in the Queensway bar. And I said, "Admiral, it's very difficult for me to have to ask you this, but the divorce law of the time compels it. I have to ask you, when did you last sleep with your wife?" And it was then that I learned the vital importance of the sporting metaphor in English dialogue. Because I'll never forget what he said. He said, "We batted on for the first 6 months and then we drew stumps." And I learnt another terribly important literary lesson. Something which has to be learnt by all playwrights, all screenwriters, all novelists, all barristers, which is when to cut the dialogue, shut up, pull down the curtain, end the chapter, finish the scene. And I learnt that, if I may just give you an instance. I was doing a rustic rural divorce case way to the west of here, and my client was accused of nothing less than committing adultery with a young lady in the middle of the 7-acre barley field. And the only witness to this horrific account was Farmer Brown, who said he'd been standing on the edge of the 7-acre barley field and he'd seen it take place. And I, young, slim, slender, upwardly mobile, all that, got up and I cross-examined Farmer Brown with my usual brilliance. So, "Farmer Brown," I said, "when you were a young man, did you ever take a girl into the middle of the 7-acre barley field?"
"Oh, are."
"And sat very close to her?"
"Oh, are."
"And ever lay down beside her?"
"Oh, are."
"You might even have kissed her?"
"Oh, are."
That's when I should have cut the dialogue, sat down, ended the scene. But I had to ask the final, insane, idiotic question. So, "Farmer Brown," I said, "any casual witness standing on the edge of the 7-acre barley field on that occasion might have come to the conclusion that you were committing adultery."
Oh, are, and they'd be damn right too.
I don't know what you think about marriage. I think some American recently said marriage is very like a hurricane. It starts off with all that sucking and blowing, and in the end you lose your house. My father was a Darwinian evolutionist who told me that you couldn't possibly make a horse in 7 days, let alone 7 millennia, I don't know. And he wasn't very keen on the idea of immortality. He used to say, the immortality of the soul, a bit of a boring conception. Imagine living for all eternity in a vast transcendental hotel with absolutely nothing to do in the evening. But there is a kind of religious feeling which I can understand. When you're in a beech wood with the wind whipping through it, or looking down at the sea from the cliffs, a sort of oneness with nature.
No time ago, or else a life walking in the dark, I met Christ, Jesus. My heart flopped over and lay still while he passed, as close as I'm to you, yes, closer, made of nothing except loneliness.
That was E.E. Cummings again. I've talked a lot about my father and the house he built in the country, where I live with my wife and children and where all my children come. He really taught me nothing, particularly he never told me the difference between right and wrong, and I'm very confused about that to this day. But what I read and what I write is his standards I refer to, because he really taught me everything. And I chose this last poem afterwards by Thomas Hardy as an epitaph for him, or for me, or for all of us who spend our best days in the country and notice the things that matter.
When the present has latched its postern behind my tremulous day, and the May month flaps its glad green leaves like wings, delicate filmed as new-spun silk, will the neighbours say, he was a man who used to notice such things?
If it be in the dusk, when like an eyelid's soundless blink, the dew-fall hawk comes crossing the shades to alight upon the wind-warped upland thorn, a gazer may think, to him this must have been a familiar sight.
I passed during some nocturnal blackness, mothy and warm, when the hedgehog travels furtively over the lawn. One may say, he strove that such innocent creatures should come to no harm, but he could do little for them, and now he is gone.
If, when hearing that I have been stilled at last, they stand at the door, watching the full-starred heavens that winter sees, will this thought rise on those who will meet my face no more? He was one who had an eye for such mysteries.
And will any say, when my bell of quittance is heard in the gloom, and a crossing breeze cuts the pause in its outrollings, till they rise again, as they were a new bell's boom. He hears it not now, but used to notice such things.